surprise, debate review today. Aron, Trent, Dougherty. Enjoy.
Aron, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you. I was thinking that this was just going to be more or less an even discussion, but to establish my position, I guess we're just a couple of minutes then.
Yeah,
right?
just
Okay.
I figured I put the ball on your court just because you're taking the affirmative.
All right.
But
Well,
you could go either way.
There's a lot of different aspects about Christianity that is dangerous. One of among the worst of them, I guess, would be the requirement that you have to believe something. You can't analyze it. You can't test it. You can't. You literally don't have an option on whether you're going to believe it or not, because you are threatened with the fate worse than death if you don't believe it, and you will be killed in this life. At least throughout most of history, most nations would kill you, and this is still the case in many nations today. Would kill you if you don't believe.
Wow, did you guys know that? Many Christian nations still today will kill you for not believing. I'd like at least one citation.
So Christianity is just one of the religions that would do that, and then it's the way that it's also being manipulated. There's a lot of political aspects to it about the way that Christianity has been used to separate, segregate, and oppress. My family was Mormon. They had a Mormon execution order that was signed by a Christian governor of Missouri in, I think, 1828. It was called the Mormon Execution Order that allowed state militias to hunt down and kill whole families of Mormons. And this was something that went on in the United States, despite the First Amendment, which is supposed to protect us from things like that. I mean, the founding fathers saw that the first people that came over to this continent from Europe were supposedly escaping religious persecution, but what they were really doing was just visiting more religious persecution against each other. I mean, so the Puritans, the Pilgrims, and the Quakers are all at each other's throats, and the Catholics came over and just started indiscriminately killing and enslaving everybody. And of course, the Catholics versus the Protestants as well. And so you have interdenominational conflict of death and mayhem. And that's just the harsh end of it. On the lightest end of it, the very least, just simply acquiescing Christianity at all requires that you will lie to yourself, at least to some degree, because everybody in any religion, if you're going to witness, and this is what I really love about Christians, they're supposed to witness things they've never really seen, right?
They witness things they never really seen. Now, this sounds like begging the question.
How dishonest is that? All they've done is they professed it that okay, we've succumbed to the side effects of confirmation bias, as would anybody else of any other religion, or if you just had a paranoid belief in aliens who were communicating through your tinfoil hat telepathically. The same sort of thing happens regardless what your religious perspective is. So Christianity can't claim any special credit for that. This is what everybody goes through. But when they're witnessing, what they're doing is in order to profess this faith, they have to assert facts that aren't facts. They will tell you straight out, who God is and what he hates and what he's going to do, as if they know, right? It's not, well, I believe this, or here's what the storybook says. No, they're going to profess it like they know it.
Now, in the midst of all of those assertions, Aron slips in the term storybook to try and trivialize the significance of the scriptures. Atheists often do this, a lot of times unconsciously, with terms like fairy tale, fable, magic, storybook. This is known as a facile analogy. Facile just means giving a simplistic explanation without accounting for the complexities of a position or view. There's a running joke around Christians that atheists will always be the first to bring up magic. Now, with that being said, the reason why Christians claim Scripture is knowledge is because of their epistemology. It's not just that they claim beliefs as facts because they want to, but rather because they believe God exists. It's trivially easy to see how God could reveal something to them such that they could know it. Now, you may think that is cheating or say it doesn't make sense, but this is what's called internal worldview critique. You have to actually assume the person's worldview in order to break down their position, something that Aron seems incapable of doing.
Right? So they're stating facts that are not facts, and asserting empty speculation as though it were fact is dishonest. Yet that's what all religions do.
Yet another assertion. He says, asserting empty speculation as though it were fact is dishonest. Then he asserts, as all religions do. First of all, I'd like to know, has he studied every religion that's ever existed? What about Baha'i? What about Buddhists who don't even believe in God? What about atheists who consider their atheist churches religious? Are they all asserting empty speculation as though it were fact?
They all pretend to know things they don't know, which is essentially what faith is.
He asserts that they all, not some, they all pretend to know things they don't know, and that is essentially what faith is. Besides the fact that he's generalizing about what billions of people in the world do, when you use the term pretend, you are assuming that they are knowingly lying about their claim to knowledge. Not just that they are claiming something that they don't actually know, but they are purposely lying about it. Secondly, that's essentially what faith is. Give me one reference from any dictionary or any scholar that you can choose from anywhere, and I'll accept it.
Faith is the most dishonest position it is possible to have, and it's auto-deceptive. So even if it didn't lead to people murdering their children, as has often happened in order to protect them from Satan and other such things, even if that were not the case, even if they're not pursuing somebody, the false prophecy of the month of how the world's going to end this week, even if they're not doing all of these horrible things to each other, they're still assuming lies and preventing themselves from understanding or even wanting to know the truth. I've had many people tell me that they don't care what the truth is. They want to believe what they want to believe, even if they already know that it's not true. And on some occasions, I've even got admissions that they know that it's not true, but they're going to believe it anyway.
At this point, it just seems like he's making things straight off the top of his head up, and I defy him to produce a single person that says, even though they know something's wrong and not the truth, that they're going to believe it anyway because they want to. This is just a misguided diatribe.
That to me is hugely damaging, and I don't see how you can argue that somebody's placebo effect, as this is what happened last week. Somebody was trying to argue that the counter argument was that, well, some people get a nice placebo effect out of this, it makes them happier, and then I have to call that old quote out. The point about whether a Christian is happier than an atheist is no more to the point than whether a drunk man is happier than a sober one. On the rare occasion that is even actually true, it's irrelevant. So being able to find where somebody makes the excuse that their faith makes them stronger, which, by the way, it doesn't, but they think it does because they've been programmed to attribute that, it doesn't matter. You've got nothing but detriment. You've got no positive aspect that could justify all of the ill that Christianity does. And Christianity only does this because it is a religion, and all religions do this, but Christianity has a history. It's unique in that it is the bloodiest religion in history. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Not only is none of that true, the difference between a scholar and a layman is that a scholar cites sources.
You bet. Thanks so much, Aron. And go ahead. Conversation, please.
All right, before Trent starts his rebuttal, I got a few things I would like to point out. Number one, Aron keeps interrupting everything he says. He doesn't get to make any clear points before he is interrupted. Secondly, I'd just like to point out that James, although I really like and think is a great guy, he often is afraid that his channel will look like a Christian channel, and so he interrupts Christians a lot and tells them to allow the atheists to finish making their points. But if you notice, Aron interrupts a lot more, and he doesn't let Trent finish his points, and you can see some of the same things in other modern day debates with James interrupting the Christian, even when they're being talked over most of the time. I think this is just because he's afraid that his channel will look like it's one-sided.
Thanks. So, you know, I was going to actually ask you, Aron. I actually kind of rehearsed it in my head. I was going to ask if you minded if I asked you a personal question, and I was hoping that you would say yes.
Go right ahead.
Well, you already answered it. I was going to ask you what your religious background was. And the question wasn't going to be, do you have a religious background? The question was going to be, what is it? And I was going to guess that it was Assemblies of God.
Well, I was lucky in that I was raised by a Mormon family, because what the advantage that I got out of that was that when we were living in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico, in the Mormon dominant areas, you know, there's places in that Four Corners area where if you're not Mormon, you're not employed. But once we got out of that,
they get T-shirts like, if you ain't Mormon, you ain't shit.
Exactly. So once we got out of that area, once we were in Los Angeles, for example, I mean, then the people that I run into on the street are not Mormon. They're typically Christian, but not Mormon. And yes, Mormon is a subgroup of Christians. I mean,
Trent starts to make a good point about how he knew that Aron must have been from a Mormon or Assemblies of God background due to his definition of faith, but Aron has a strange interruption where he says, well, actually, being the contrarian he is, actually, I was fortunate to be raised Mormon. And then why? He goes on to say, because when we moved to Los Angeles, no one there was Mormon. It was more Christian. And Mormonism is a branch of Christianity. How did that relate to why you were lucky to be raised Mormon?
Yeah, well, the reason why I was going to guess Assemblies of God, and the reason why Mormon makes sense, is that the concept of faith you have is clearly not. So I'm Roman Catholic. I'm a convert. I was raised nothing, what I call pessimistic agnostic. They didn't know if there was a God or not, but they sure as hell hope not. And then I got born again. It's a burnout party boy at 16. Then got to reading history, became Episcopal, and then eventually Roman Catholic.
Yeah, I got to wonder how one does that. I mean,
lots of us have done it.
Taking all the steps down, how did you take each one after the other? How did you assume, first of all, that magic exists at all? Because that's what the supernatural is.
And there's the facile appeal to magic. And again, give me a single source of anything that equates magic and supernaturalism.
So you have to first assume that there's a supernatural, and then you have to assume that deity exists.
Hey, hold on. Let's slow your roll, bro.
And then you got to assume that it's the Christian God.
Follow that dog.
And then you got to assume that on top of it being a Christian God, it's got to be the Catholic God. And I mean, that had to have been decades ago that conversion happened, because how does anybody convert to Catholicism now?
I got lots of good friends that are converted in the last year. What it shows is that I began to, it says my microphone switched back and forth there for a second. What the series of conversions show, from atheism, Christianity, from Catholicism to Episcopalianism, and from that to Roman Catholicism, is that I'm very open to finding out that I was mistaken in important regards.
Well, yeah, and so am I. I never learn so much as when I find out that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But
so
I still have to follow you down that stairway.
Yeah. Well, how about you follow me in my response to what you said first, okay?
Okay, what's
that?
And
so
that was super refreshing. Seems like Aron goes on tangents and tries to obfuscate any chance that he can get.
All I was saying was that it makes sense to me that you're coming from a Mormon background, because
I'm not coming from a Mormon background.
We can roll back the tape that you were raised by Mormon parents, whatever.
Right. I was.
That you had sort of imbued in you this idea of faith that comes out of Mormonism.
No.
Which is the burning of the bosom.
No.
Because your concept of faith is utterly, totally foreign to the Roman Catholic concept.
Yeah, it's foreign to Mormons too. It's foreign to Mormons too, but it's actually what the Scripture says.
And it's not just Aquinas.
It's not just a Christian scripture.
For
It's
the 19th
it's Muslim.
century
It's Muslim scripture and
contemporary period.
Hindu scriptures.
No Christian that I know of personally.
I know. Every Christian I
Such a
ever
view.
talk to, we always have this argument.
Well, there might be a reason.
I
for
tell
that,
them.
Aron.
I tell them that.
That's kind of like maybe you ought to ask them what they believe.
Hey, I do. I prove my point.
Because maybe they know what they believe, and maybe the reason they believe it is because it's what's espoused in Scripture. It's what's espoused by the major thinkers of the Christian faith from the medieval period through the Enlightenment period.
So you're holding up some books. I can hold up the Bible that supports me. I can hold up the Quran that supports me. I can hold up the Bhagavad Gita that supports me. All of the scriptures support what I'm saying here.
So let me go through the.
And every Christian. Hold on. Let me demonstrate this. Let me demonstrate.
Go through your responses.
Let me demonstrate this.
Well, no. It's my time to respond to what you said.
Okay.
That was merely a comment on that was merely a statement that we have different concepts of faith.
I don't think we do, actually.
Yeah, we do.
I get in this argument. Every single Christian says,
yeah,
no, that's
I
not
bet
what faith
you do.
is. And then we have the discussion, and then every Christian says that's not what faith is, and then we have the discussion wherein we immediately prove that is in fact what their faith is. That they agree with me ultimately, and it only happens in a couple of minutes.
Do you have a video of these people agreeing with you?
I have lots of them. Now, see, they don't want to ever say that that's what faith is.
Most of that doesn't even deserve a response. But right there at the end, he says, Christians always say that's not what faith is. And then when I break it down, they end up agreeing with me and saying that's what faith is. Then he asked him, does he have any of those people on camera? He says, yes. He says, but then they never want to admit that that's what it is. But you just said that they end up admitting that that's what it is. I don't understand how he got lost.
But when they tell me that when I say that faith is a belief that is not based on evidence, they will counter and they will say that it's based on evidence. And I will say, well, what evidence is that based on? And then it ends up being argument from authority, logical fallacy, or subjective impression. Anything but scientific evidence, which is what I stated at the beginning.
Have you heard of Richard Swinburne?
No, I haven't. But I've had this argument over and over again where somebody says, somebody says, well, have you heard of X? Or have you heard of, what was the name of the guy that got famous by being an atheist and trying to prove the Bible wrong by only asking Christians about it? And then he writes a book about it. What the hell was his name? I can't remember. Well, anyway.
There's one of his main problems is he says, whenever I ask them for evidence of that definition of faith, then what they give me is not scientific evidence. That's your problem. Is you equate scientific evidence with evidence. He does the same thing in his debate with Inspiring Philosophy and with Eric Hernandez. Now, to the next point, he asked, does he know who Richard Swinburne is? Which he says, no, he doesn't know who Richard Swinburne is. That doesn't surprise me. But then he goes on this tangent about how, oh, well, that's like saying, do I know who, what's the atheist guy's name? And he goes on some tangents about some atheist that doesn't have any relevance at all. And he does this throughout the rest of the debate and in many other debates he does. Seems like he's doing it to obfuscate or to try and distract Trent and the other opponents from nailing him on these points.
He supposedly has, what?
Was it Lee Strobel?
Yes, that fraud. So this guy, he has evidence. Well, actually, okay, what is his evidence then? He didn't have any. Nobody does.
So one of my biggest dogmatisms is a view called evidentialism. My first book was a defense of evidentialism from every anti-evidentialist position that I could possibly find. And there are certainly people who, Christians who are not evidentialists. And another book that I edited also at the Oxford University Press is against, I wrote in there against skeptical theism, but even those guys don't really hold the view that you state. So my most recent project, I'm plugging a lot of my stuff here, shameless plug, is 24 or so arguments for God. Now, you might think that the evidence for God is outweighed but it is.
No. I think that there is no.
It's not a credible
No,
position.
I think that there is
there
no.
isn't any evidence.
I think there is no evidence, and what usually comes up.
What do you think evidence consists in?
That's what they always ask me, and then when I give the definition, we'll say, "Oh, yeah, that's scientific evidence. Why are you limiting it to scientific evidence?" Because I'm talking about science. That's why.
Well, give me what's your definition of evidence?
All right, and they'll ask what type of evidence do you want? I'll take anything that qualifies as evidence, which is a body of objectively verifiable facts, which I know is a bit of a tautology. A fact is objectively verifiable information, but a body of objectively verifiable.
There are lots of facts that aren't verifiable.
A fact can either be is either not in dispute because it's taken as like maybe we're talking about the context of the story perhaps, or it's indisputable in that it is objectively verifiable. This is the facts of the case.
Have you ever heard of Fitch's paradox?
No, I haven't. Did you want to know how I define evidence or no?
Yeah, I'm waiting.
Okay, good. You're not waiting if you're interrupting and trying to change the subject to something else. So objectively verifiable facts that are positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with one particular conclusion over any of them. I don't like the excuse that, well, we're both looking at the same evidence. No, we're not. If you have the same fact that would remain true in either mutually exclusive paradigm, then that's just a fact. That doesn't become evidence until it indicates one or the other, until it comports with one or the other, or indicates the other, or eliminates one.
So it's interesting. So my most recent essay appeared in this book, Believing in Accordance with the Evidence, and strangely, no scholar writing today in epistemology would accept that definition of evidence. Why do you think that is?
You don't think the standard definition of evidence is accepted by any scholar? Why would that be?
Can you give me some?
I mean, if you just Google it anywhere, I mean, it's the fact that it indicates, right?
You know of any professional epistemologists that hold that view?
I haven't asked professional epistemologists where they deviate from common language ever.
Well, I mean, when I was editing the Rutledge Handbook for Evidence, we had like 38 entries. Nobody even.
Okay, so I'm sorry that other people, and I get this because when with philosophers, it's always that way. It's always that a fact is not a fact because evidence is not evidence, so nothing can ever be objectively verified.
What?
I don't mean to seem pedantic, but you are witnessing the difference between a scholar and what people like William Lane Craig call the internet infidel atheist.
Yeah, that was a professor, a seminary professor, PhD.
Well, that's pretty sad.
That gave me that rashness shit. Yeah, he said that there's no such thing as there's nothing can ever be objectively verifiable because literally our existence is merely opinion.
Well, I definitely
this was the seminary professor of philosophy.
We're definitely we're on the same side of the line against that guy. No, I'm just a standard Bayesian.
Okay, fine. So I give you my definition, right? So I need the data that we can verify. I mean, it's not a fact unless we can show that the data is true, right? We can't just say things are true unless we can show that they are true. They might be true, but you can't claim it as truth if you can't show that it's true. Does that make sense?
What do you mean by show? Can you so take this hypothesis?
All right. So would you agree that it is dishonest, as I said before, to assert baseless speculation as though it were fact?
If you didn't believe it was, it wouldn't be.
What if I believe?
If you honestly believed it, have you ever said anything false in your life?
Yeah, I have. I've been misled a number of times.
Yeah, and that's not.
And it's still wrong, isn't it?
But it's not dishonest.
If I was lied to,
flag the tape. You said dishonest. It is not dishonest to speak that which is not true.
Yeah, but we're changing context because I said empty speculation. I'm not saying if you're repeating something that was your understanding that turned out to be wrong. No, that's not what I said. I said baseless speculation asserted as fact. So you believe it not for any reason, just feels good to you, right? Like you maybe get a mental impression that, hey, you need to go home right now because somebody's trying to break into your house right now, and they're getting into the house and your family's in danger. You need to go home right now. Well, if I just say that, and I don't have any way of saying that, I mean, I have no way of knowing that, right? that even if the case was that somebody did try to burgle your house, if I don't have a way of knowing that when I said it, it's still wrong. It's still dishonest.
Hey man, I'm an evidentialist, absolute dyed-in-the-wool evidentialist. We don't got to debate that one. We're
okay.
Same side of that one. But as a Bayesian, the evidential support relation is a formal structure, and it's a formal structure, so it's got multiple realizability. There's lots of things that can be evidence in the contemporary debates in epistemology. Hold it up, please. In the contemporary debates in epistemology volume, I defend a view called that takes evidence to be a functional role. And Tom Kelly, in his Stanford Encyclopedia article, he's a Princeton philosopher specialist in evidence. He defends a really nice functional role view of evidence, that something counts as evidence just in case it performs certain functional roles. So the evidential relation is multiply realizable. So there's all sorts of things that can function as evidence. One of the most common things that can function as evidence is a verified prediction. If you observe some data and a hypothesis,
that would be a fact by my definition.
Okay. And so that's, what Swinburne and others do is they take observations that are agreed upon, and they just point out that.
Okay, so point out meaning that fact indicates.
Facts. And no
so the fact does indicate.
Philosopher I've ever met has ever denied that there's evidence for theism. They just think the evidence against it outweighs it.
I get that, but I mean, so you agree that it is that what you say fact, the observation of the data, which is the same thing that I'm saying for fact, and that points to, and I said that it indicates. So in fact, we are actually using the same language. The fact that indicates is still evidence. So I'm still waiting for.
But you said.
Let me explain something else. I mean, when I normally.
Well, you haven't. What do you mean? You can't explain something else because you haven't explained anything yet.
Something different, as in else. So that you'll understand the illustration of what I'm going here. Let me make an illustration for you.
We'll see.
I normally deal with creationism because I teach evolution. What?
Why? Why do you deal with? It's like your whole concept of Christianity is nothing but fundamentalism.
They're the most dangerous. Right?
Okay, so what? But they're also not like the definition of the view.
In another recent debate,
there's lots of Christians that are dangerous. There's atheists that are dangerous, but we're talking about the
irrelevant to the point that either of us were trying to make now. That's just another interruption.
It's part of the whole purpose of our.
No, it isn't. So what I was trying to get to, the fundamentalists, right? So they are the most Christian, right? I mean, they're the most
they're the least Christian.
Most hardcore.
They're the least extreme.
Hold on, Trent. Oh, sorry, forgive you. I love you guys are both passionate. I just want to let Aron get this point out really quick.
So at this point, it seems that Trent is just taking it to Aron on every single one of his points, and I'm not sure if Aron tells the moderator ahead of time, I will quit if I don't feel welcome or I feel like I'm being talked over. But seems that James steps in for a reason. I'm not sure. And Aron does threaten to quit when things get hot toward the end of the debate.
Okay, so I've been sidetracked so many times I don't even remember which point I'm going. So I'm talking to creationism. They always tell me that they always want to do a number of switches. The false dichotomy. The creationism is based on evidence, and science is based on faith. That's always the false equivocate or the false equivalence fallacy that they're always trying to use. And so I just see every discussion opening with that. And when the creationists tell me that there is no evidence of evolution, I start giving exact examples of evidence of evolution. Of course, they don't accept that because they want evolution to be godlessness instead of a biological process. So when I'm starting to describe biological processes, I'm going over their head because they don't want to know what is really true. But here, if we want to argue creation versus evolution, I give that, here's the thing that we watch in the lab. We watch evolution happen. This is the definition of what evolution is, and they'll argue that that's not evolution. But hey, here's the thing. Here's the proof that it exists. Now, give me an example of creationism. Give me an example of something being created. We don't have that. So give me I give the evidence for anything I claim from the fossil record, from genetics, from whatever, from phylogeny, whatever it is. I give the evidence to back that up. What I get from the Christian never qualifies as evidence in the same context.
Done?
Yeah.
Okay. So in response to your opening remarks, it sounded like one of the criticisms of Christianity that made it dangerous was that it requires belief.
Yeah.
Okay.
On pain of death or fate worse than death.
Is it the requirement to believe by itself a bad-making feature, or is it only when conjoined with?
If you're required to believe anything and you're going to be punished if you don't believe that, that's already a thought crime.
Let's say aren't you like in charge of some kind of atheist group, some organization or entity or something?
I'm a regional director of American Atheists.
American Atheists.
Mm-hmm.
To be a member, could I be a member of that group?
No,
Why not?
because it's an atheist organization.
I've got to hold a specific belief to be a member of your organization?
Yeah, it's
That's
a group of
rough,
atheists,
man.
yeah.
That's rough.
And we have had atheists that have bowed out because they've decided to go back to their Christian flock.
What if I
reason.
was an atheist when I joined, but I
Mhm.
became a Christian? What would happen to me then?
Are you going to be as any kind of an advocate for First Amendment defense? Because we could probably still use you, even if it wouldn't make any sense for you to go into any of our events.
Suppose the answer is no. I believe the First Amendment's garbage.
You think the First Amendment is garbage?
No, I said suppose that I believe that scenario.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was about to declare victory in this debate. So, so the First Amendment is one of the most important things we have, and of course, the First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment, which is another thing that makes.
Okay, so I had
Christianity so
a
bad.
very direct question. The
Okay.
question was, if I join your group
Mm-hmm,
as an atheist who loves the First Amendment,
mm-hmm.
and then a burst of gamma rays from Alpha Centauri hits my brain, and I form the belief that atheism is false and that the First Amendment is garbage, what happens to me in your group?
Well, if you're not going to be an advocate, if you're not going to be helpful to us, then you would leave.
What if I didn't want to leave?
I'm trying to imagine a situation. We've never had to forcibly remove somebody.
But you would.
Why wouldn't I? If you're not going to be a part of this organization, if you're not going to appreciate being in this organization, why would you continue to attend?
That's a really relevant question. But my question is, what would you do to me in that situation? That's the question.
Again, having never experienced that, I couldn't say.
You can't imagine. You can't imagine what would happen if a member of your atheist group became a First Amendment or a Christian fascist. We both know what would happen, and everybody listening knows.
How do we both know? I mean, if I don't know, if I remember what I said about,
I would be executed
well,
by Pope Ra.
excuse me, Mr. Christian, remember what I said about it being dishonest to assert baseless speculations or fact? Don't assert that you know what I know, because you don't. And that was a false statement you just made. Don't do it again.
Confident. I'm pretty.
Yeah.
Don't do it again.
Yeah.
What will happen if I do?
You may not know how to leave an organization when you're not welcome, but I do.
Sure, but that wasn't the question. The question was, what would happen to me? Would I be allowed to be a
The
member?
question is, if you're going to keep telling me what I know when you don't know what I know, so you were therefore lying, if all you're going to do is lie to me, then I have no purpose in being here.
What I said was, I think we all have a pretty good idea. What
We
would happen.
don't, as I just expressed honestly. So you didn't say that we have a pretty good idea. You said we both know. No, we don't.
After
Yeah.
that,
If we did,
I do think we both
But
know.
I don't lie. So when I said I don't know, that means I don't know. That
Well,
doesn't mean you know
I'll
it.
take your word for it, but I still believe I know what you would do. And furthermore,
Christians are used to believing things that are
I
not
would-
true. I get
would
that.
approve of it. I would think you were doing exactly the right thing when you gave me the boot from the atheist group when I became a Christian. Perfectly appropriate. I think that any atheist group would be right to do
We
that.
did have
I
one
think
person.
If I joined the American
we
Humanist
did
Association
have one person
and
who
came
was
to
back.
believe the proposition that was the negation of the conjunction of all their tenets, I think they would be right to kick me out.
Well, that wouldn't be.
If I
That
joined the
wouldn't be.
Communist Party and came to believe in that communism was terrible, I think they'd be right to kick me out.
the only person that we've kicked out, to my knowledge, that actually did go back to the Christian congregation also got into trouble over some other unrelated issues, and that's why that person had to be removed.
Okay.
But that's the only instance I know of.
So the other one was that Christian.
So we were still waiting to go down that stairway with you about what was the evidence that changed your mind. I mean, the first step of that stairway was what convinced you that there was a supernatural.
Well, we'll get there, but right now I took nice little notes on your opening remarks, and I want to give your opening remarks justice because it seemed like there were 3 points. We've covered the first one. The second one appeared to be that Christianity had been used for bad political purposes.
And that's all it's capable of, yeah.
So no one at any time or place on planet Earth has used Christianity for any positive purpose?
Well, we can go with that weird stretch, but that's of course not what I said.
Yeah, I really did.
If you walk away, and this is an argument
statement, I thought.
A couple of months ago, I had a debate about whether Christianity has historically conflicted with science, and giving all of the examples to prove yes, that is the case. There'd be no number of things that you could say in this instance, not being objectionable to science doesn't mean that Christianity has never been. But the issue that this guy brought up was that not every Christian objects to evolution, for example. Not every Christian is a geocentrist. Not every Christian is a flat earther, and so forth. True. But then that's when you're walking away from the religion. If you actually buy into it like the fundamentalists do, where the word is the law and that's the way you're going to believe it, then yeah, you have to object to virtually all science.
So what was this? It sounded so. What's the second point then? Because it really didn't sound like you were saying that.
And this was brought up, I think, in the introduction. Or no, it wasn't in the introduction. It was in a debate that I did last week, where they were complaining that the less religious you are, the more reasonable you are, and religious people who are moderate will, like yourself, tell me that we're both on the same side of this issue. We're not with those crazies over there, right? So the more zealous, the more fundamentalist you are, then the more against science you are, and the more you're going to be like the dominionists who want to promote. To want to take over the government and replace it with a theocracy that enforces Levitical law, for example. I've actually met those people.
Yeah, all 4 of them.
No, it wasn't 4 of them. That's the reason I became an activist, was because I had found out that certain judges and senators had been placed by a coalition of different congregations across the state that were all voting as their ministers told them, because the ministers combined, these are the people they wanted to have elected in their state. And they revealed to me what was later revealed to be the wedge strategy. Are you familiar with the wedge strategy?
Yep, thin into the wedge.
Okay, so that's what they were talking about. But they were a little bit more zealous because they were following R.J. Rushdoony of the Chalcedon Institute. And then they had a list of senators that their collective congregations had successfully put into our state and federal government. So not all 4 of them, but quite a lot. I don't know how many dozens of dozens, but there were quite a lot in order to have elected all of these people in a coordination of different congregations across the state. Certainly not 4.
Well, certainly not you think like the majority of people voting for him were traced back to this trilateral commission?
Did I say anything that could draw a reasonable person to draw that conclusion?
Well, yeah, I think so, because you said they installed him.
They were voting as a coalition. That does not mean that everybody who voted for that judge is part of one of those congregations.
I know. I said, do you think the majority did?
I would have no idea.
Well, if you have no idea, why are you talking about this?
Okay, because I did state that the brag was that it was a collection of congregations.
Yeah.
To negate your claim that it was only 4 people. Obviously, multiple congregations across the state is not 4 people.
Yeah, that was a joke. The point is,
and the fact that we actually do have,
it's not that many people.
With the fact that we
meet a lot. There just aren't that many guys
the
out.
fact that we had more than a dozen people in our federal government at that time, who came from the Chalcedon Institute would be further evidence of this.
Well, so what's the claim about the political use of, is it that, I'm not getting the second point. You said that Christianity was used for nefarious political purposes.
Oh yeah, the sticking point was where I said that's all it can do.
Yeah, that's why you said all, and then I said my thing about do you not think there's been a single person ever, and you said,
for example,
more extreme,
since we're holding up books.
But you said all.
Yeah, no, I didn't say all. I said it's the only purpose it can do. And this book's
that's an all state. If you convert that, I mean, logic is AEIO. That's a type A proposition.
Yeah, if you stick to the rules of Christianity, then a negative government is all you can do. And the book I was just holding up was giving a few hundred examples of that, where going through the founding of this country, for example, and where Christianity and Christian belief constantly contradicts everying that our country was based on.
It's so funny because
right down to the Ten Commandments.
You got these. I got the fundamentalists on my right telling me, this is a Christian nation and all this stuff, and
yeah.
And
by the way, let me promote this book because this was extraordinarily good. Right, this is The Founding Myth: Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American by Andrew Seidel from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Extremely good book.
Yeah, I certainly believe that. So I got these fundamentalists on this side telling me, doing this Christian nation thing, and I've got you over here telling me like that's all it can do. And it's just funny to be in the middle here, listening to both sides. And
yeah, as I said, the First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment. I mean, that just makes a demonstration right there.
What's the First Commandment?
The First Commandment: Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
And how does the First Amendment contradict that?
That Congress shall make no law even establishing, even respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that the state cannot claim a religion, nor impede on anyone else's religious practices. And this is on the assumption that there are multiple religions now. This is religious freedom. You can't have freedom of religion unless you have freedom from religion, because once the state declares its own faith, once the state declares a national faith, then every other denomination or every other sect becomes second-class citizens to be oppressed and in many instances killed.
So I'm not getting the contradiction between the First Amendment and the First Commandment. You're gonna have
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Right.
Have whatever gods you want.
Can we just slow down?
Okay.
So the negation of that, the contradiction of that would be, it is the case that thou shalt have other gods before me, or something like that. So that's what the negation
according to our First Amendment, you can have other. The state is not a religious government; it's we the people, and the Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting free exercise thereof. So it doesn't matter what you believe; that is irrelevant to your position or your citizenship. And that's why it went on to say that
that's not what it says.
What?
Not what it says.
It does say exactly what I just said. Yes.
No.
The Congress shall make no law respecting
the thing that you said after that was the supposed
nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It actually does say exactly that verbatim.
Yeah, but you gave an implication of it.
And then I said that's why they went later and also wrote that there will be no religious tests to hold any office. That it also says as well.
There's no contradiction. I mean, just formally speaking, as a logician.
Okay. So God is saying.
Well, hold on, just one second. Do you mean their intention, or do you mean their intention, or do you mean they're literally contradictory? Because it might be that as a logician, I'm like imposing my formal language on you, and I don't want to do that.
Okay, so we have this God who says that you can't worship any other God, and then we have this government.
I got a more basic question. The basic question was, when you said they're in contradiction, did you mean logical contradiction? Because I took you to mean logical contradiction. You might only mean their intention. I just want to know which one you mean.
Well, I think we're going for intention here. God doesn't want you to have any other religion, and we know that any deviation from that is punishable by death. So that's, if you question it, right? If that's heresy, apostasy, or blasphemy, right? But in this country, blasphemy is a right.
Yeah, but if God tells me not to have any other gods before me,
right? Then there can't be no deviation from that.
The state tells me, believe whatever you want, I don't care.
Yep.
Okay, there's no tension there.
Yeah, so we obviously have not been established by God. My state, Texas, in its history books, teaches, despite every expert testimony that was there. I mean, there were dozens of people, professors from all these universities, even religious universities, Jewish, Christian, and so forth, that were giving their testimony that this country was not a Christian country, that American exceptionalism is a myth, and that the United States was absolutely not. And the founding fathers were explicit in their denial of this, that it was not in any sense based on the Ten Commandments specifically, nor on any aspect of Christianity.
You know, where are we going with this?
Wherever you were leading, you were asking questions, I was giving an answer.
My question was, how is the first commandment and the First Amendment in contradiction? The First Commandment says,
the explanation that I gave was that God
says to God's people, don't set another God up instead of God. And the First Amendment says, believe whatever you want, we don't care.
Well, in that sense, Christianity also contradicts the First
There's
Amendment.
no tension there whatsoever.
Well, yeah, there is, because God says in Isaiah 45, no, I'm sorry, no, it's the First Commandment. God says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And then Jesus comes along and says that the way to the Father is the only way to the Father is through me. So just to be Christian means that you have to contradict the First Amendment. But then the founding of the government.
The First Amendment or the First Commandment? You said First Amendment. Which did
the First Amendment of the Constitution contradicts the First Commandment in that where God is demanding you can't have any other religion, including no heresy, you can't deviate, you believe what I say, period. And the government is saying, no, you have freedom of religion.
The thou in thou shalt have no other gods before me are the people of God. So God says to me, don't have any other gods before me. And then,
right, except for Jesus, we'll somehow make an exception for him.
And the U.S. Constitution says to me, I don't give a shit what you believe.
Right.
So there's just not even a prima facie tension.
So the prima facie thing is God says you can't have freedom of religion. Government says yes, you can.
The First Commandment has nothing to do with political.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Okay.
Right.
That's right.
No freedom of religion. No freedom of religion. The U.S. government says yes, you can have freedom of religion.
There's
so the no, you can't, and the yes, you can kind of contradict each other.
Okay, all right. So then the third thing was something about you to be a Christian, you have to lie to yourself.
Yep.
And then you said something about witnessing and pretending.
Yep. Because faith is make believe. You have to make yourself believe, because if you don't believe, then you're damned. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're a good person. A lot of Christians get really weird about this, and they want to make morality an issue as if that was relevant. And that's kind of a mystery to me. I never understood why Christians think morality is an issue for God, because God doesn't judge you on whether you're good or bad, regardless whether there's a God or not. History will be your judge.
Well,
and how, but
I mean, you're presenting honestly, Aron. You're presenting great. Sorry, what?
Aron.
Dang it. Aron. You're presenting great arguments against fundamentalism. I think that's awesome.
Okay.
I'm with you, man.
But it's not, as you can see, or should see soon, it's not limited to fundamentalism. So even on the basis on the most basic acceptance of Christianity, you still have to believe.
Everything you're saying is so foreign to the Catholic position.
One sec, just to make sure to hear what you were going after, Aron. What was the point you were making?
The basic assumption that you have to believe something that the Christians will say, well, we don't believe without evidence. I'm going to say, yeah, you believe without evidence. And we're saying, oh, we got lots of evidence. We've got this magic book of fables.
So I just let them go for a little while because there was nothing really for me to comment on that would add value. There again, Aron makes the appeal to magic fable books, and the reason why I didn't comment on the other portion is because it was political and it was just a tangent that was unrelated, irrelevant to the topic. Trent followed him down that rabbit hole because he's a generous guy, and I think he just wanted to genuinely see where he was going with it. But there's The debate is kind of winding down now.
Yeah, that's the problem. All you've got is a magic book of fables. That doesn't prove anything. Then you may as well claim that there is evidence for Islam and there's evidence for Hinduism.
I think there is evidence for Islam and evidence for Hinduism.
Well,
I just think it's outweighed, but I think there's evidence for atheism.
Okay, so you're using a historian's context of evidence, not a scientific context of evidence.
I'm using the Bayesian context of evidence. I think
historians will use a context of evidence that you can have good evidence or bad evidence, evidence that weighs against other evidence, and you can read, because it's all interpretations of writing, then you can have indications to a particular interpretation, and they will call that evidence of that interpretation, and others will, of course, interpret it differently. But science has a different definition where you can't have the same evidence be evident of two different mutually exclusive conclusions at the same time. Now, you can do that in history for the reasons I just explained, but you can't do it in science. I don't see why that's funny. That's just the fact.
It just... have you read anything about Bayes' theorem?
No, I haven't.
So the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a really great article on Bayes' theorem. I think it's written by James Hawthorne, who's really, really, really good writer. And I'm pretty sure he's not a Christian or anything like it. But he's not a real doctrinaire guy. In the Bayesian concept of evidence, a proposition is evidence just in case it raises the probability of a hypothesis over and above what it was before. And the more and more of us in epistemology, or in a discipline called formal epistemology, are accepting a Bayesian concept of evidence. And in the philosophy of science, and the discipline within the philosophy of science called confirmation theory, by and large...
Are you confusing the philosophy of science with the practice of science?
No.
Because the last time I mentioned the words philosophy of science, I was immediately accused of that simply for saying those words.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out because that's what happens to me.
Anytime
I say that, I'm immediately accused of not knowing the difference between the two. Go ahead.
Again, totally irrelevant and off base. Trent is humbly educating Aron on what Bayes' theorem is. You can tell by Aron's diatribe about weighing evidence, and this evidence can outweigh that evidence, that he had never heard of Bayes' theorem, which is why he brought up the point, Trent brought up the point about, has he ever read anything about Bayes' theorem? And before he can finish espousing this view, Aron interrupts him because he said the term philosophy of science, to ask him, are you confusing the philosophy of science with the practice of science? Okay. Just kind of random.
No, good philosophers of science do rational reconstructions of what the people who practice science do. So Richard Swinburne does this in his book, The Existence of God. He talks, his prime case is the way that Newton's theory generalized both Kepler's laws of planetary motion and Galileo's observations about the motions of falling bodies. And so he points out that rightly people came to believe in Newton's theory. And so he gives a rational reconstruction as to how the data of Kepler and Galileo confirm Newton's theory. And he also does the same thing with respect to the case for evolution as made in Darwin's Origin of Species. And philosophers of science within the confirmation theory will look at these paradigm cases of excellent scientific inference and will determine that they have a common mathematical structure represented by Bayes' theorem and the Bayesian concept of evidence. And that's the view that I subscribe to. It's the view that my favorite, mentors and philosophers of religion subscribe to, like Richard Swinburne and others. And it's also the view of atheists like John Ehrman, who think that natural theology works the same way that particle physics does.
You mean Bart?
No.
You mean John Ehrman, not Bart Ehrman?
No. Bart Ehrman's, he a New Testament guy?
So I wasn't even going to comment on this. Do you mean Bart Ehrman? Like, if you've only heard of a handful of scholars in your circle, like, no, John Ehrman. But Bart Ehrman actually does say something about Bayes' theorem. In his debate with Robert Price, which I highly recommend, he did about as good as a Christian could do defending Christianity against mythicism. In the Q&A, Bart Ehrman is asked about Bayes' theorem. Does he use it or something like that? And he says, no, actually, they ask in reference to Richard Carrier, who uses Bayes' theorem to prove that Christ never existed. And he says, no, I don't use it. In fact, I only know two people who do use it. One is Richard Carrier, who proves with Bayes' theorem that Christ never existed. And the other is Richard Swinburne, who proves that Christ was raised from the dead with the same theorem. So I thought that was worth mentioning if you want to check it out.
Yeah, I've never heard of John Ehrman. I just thought this is the only one I'm familiar with.
Now, John Ehrman's a philosopher of science who writes on Bayesian epistemology and philosophy of science. He wrote a great book called Bayes or Bust. Man, if you want to read one book on Bayesian epistemology, his book Bayes or Bust is really fantastic. Okay. And it's called Bayes or Bust because he points out that the argument is that only Bayesian confirmation theory can really be true to the history of science and actual scientific inferences, and is also the only view that can deal with a lot of paradoxes within confirmation theory. And so the Bayes or Bust idea is basically that either you accept a Bayesian concept of evidence and confirmation theory, or you're just kind of screwed. And I believe that too. And both myself and the Eastern Orthodox Richard Swinburne and lots of atheists hold to this view. Atheist Paul Draper, who I think is absolutely fantastic. All these.
Okay. Is there some assumption that I'm going to contest this or that it's relevant to our discussion?
Yeah, because if you hold a Bayesian confirmation theory in the philosophy of science, it's going to be almost trivially true that there's going to be lots of evidence for Christianity.
Okay, let's chase that for a moment, because I maintain that there is none, and that's the reason why in 20 years of talking to Christians daily, I've never gotten an answer to that question about what the evidence is. So starting on that, you went from atheist to first step. You have to assume there's a supernatural. What was the evidence of that?
Well, I didn't assume it. It was.
Well, what was the evidence, the fact that indicates that there's a supernatural?
There were hundreds.
Name one.
One was
as evidence.
One was the changed lives of the individuals in the congregation. That was
that also applies to every religion and paranoid conspiracy theorists. That's right. Anybody can duplicate this. You can adopt a new hobby or become interested in politics and get the changed lives effect. There's no.
That's right.
Truth to that. Every religion claims the same thing, so that's the fact that is true in every case.
That's right.
Does not indicate that there's a supernatural.
It does indicate.
I'll grant that it indicated it for you. So
now what you're missing.
That first one doesn't qualify as evidence.
No.
I'm going to take.
Aron, no, you're literally just missing the point. You're literally just missing the point. It's a.
Well, if it were literal, then there would be a point there, and we'd be able to touch it. But it's figuratively missing. It's a figurative point.
You know, I came across this figurative use of literal the other day. The earliest instance that I've seen it was in Anne of Green Gables. They used literally that way. I found that was interesting.
Yeah, and they've recently changed the dictionary so that literally anymore.
Non-literal use of literal I've seen.
Yeah.
So that was.
What was the point that you think I missed?
So you acted as though you acted as though you believed the following proposition. One piece of data can't support mutually exclusive hypotheses.
No, that's why I've expressed earlier in this discussion quite opposite. I did not express that thing. I said, you can have data that supports either view, but then it's just a fact. It doesn't become evidence until
Well,
it
you're
eliminates
just.
one or
But
eliminates
my
the
point is, what you said was, you said, let's go down that rabbit hole when I was describing the Bayesian concept of evidence. And so I was working with the Bayesian concept of evidence there. Now, if you want to reject the Bayesian concept of evidence,
which I'm not doing. I'm rejecting a claim that
Right.
does not qualify as evidence. I don't care who wrote it; it doesn't qualify as evidence.
On the Bayesian concept
Okay.
of evidence, that's going to qualify because that's
All
going
right.
to.
So you have
cohere with
the
and be a
changed lives that
predictable
affects every other thing. Every religion claims the same thing. I've read testimonies from Hindus, from the Bhakti,
Yeah.
from people in Thailand who were worshiping the traditional gods. There was
So-
one, my favorite one. My favorite one.
Where are you going with this? Where are you going?
To the end of a sentence, if I could get there.
Yeah,
Well,
we gotta,
I'm-
So I remember
let's
I remember reading a testimony of this one woman in Thailand who said that she talked about this changed life, how her life was in the gutter and everything completely changed and turned around, and she felt new life as soon as she accepted Buddha into her life.
I don't think she understands Buddhism, if that's what
I don't either, obviously, because I've talked to a number of Buddhists and I've
But look,
found huge
that is-
contradictions.
her
What?
that experience on her part is evidence for Buddhism.
Again, if it's the same fact indicated by all religions, then it can't indicate the truth of any of them. If only one of them can be true and they're all experiencing the same thing, then the thing is not indicating the truth.
By your setup, we were talking about the first step from atheist to non-atheist.
Uh-huh. Yep, by my setup, and you failed that criteria and then told me that I missed the point that I did not miss.
Criteria is plural. You mean criterion.
Okay.
So the problem is that first step from atheist to not atheist, from naturalist to supernaturalist, it's perfectly expectable that
No.
the evidence that is part of that one part of that evidence, because I did say there were hundreds,
Yeah, but the one that you listed
supports the
isn't.
category.
But
of
you understand the one that you
supernaturalism,
listed,
not just a
isn't.
particular member.
the
of
one
that
that you
species.
listed is
So the
not
evidence can
evidence.
support a genus, and then you have further evidence to narrow down species within that genus. But we're talking about what you asked me about was the transition from naturalism to supernatural. And there's no objection to that the evidence that I mentioned supports any
Except that
number
it's
of
not evidence.
supernaturalist positions. That's
Except that it is not evidence. Because the same fact would be true in every case.
every case of what?
Oh my God! Do I really have to repeat everything over again?
Well, but if you mean every case whatsoever,
Okay,
then that's
so
mistaken versus every case of religion, then that's
All
not
right,
an
so
objection.
when
'Cause
the
that's what I
Beatles-
just said.
when the Beatles, for example, go through their conversion experience, and they accept Krishna into their lives, and John Lennon and George Harrison both went on about how they had a personal relationship with Krishna, so much so that when they chant the mantras, that not only could they imagine that he was hearing them, but they could actually see him and hear him. That he was actually that Krishna is actually in the room with them.
With the things those guys were taking, I believe they thought they saw that.
Now, is that evidence that Krishna is true?
Technically, yeah. It's just not it's not great evidence.
Yeah, and maybe Bayesian evidence, but
it can be
and
part of
maybe
a
historical evidence, but it is not scientific evidence.
It can be
If it were
part of
scientific
There's
evidence.
no historical versus scientific. On the Bayesian view, all evidence conforms to the same structure.
If it is evidence. But the same fact being true in either case does not make it evidence.
I don't think
Scientific evidence has to be true. It has to be verifiable. That is also in the Standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy. By the way.
So
scientific evidence is defined in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that it has to be true. There has to be some way of verifying it, and it has to evoke a natural law. So yours doesn't.
So there really isn't too much to say about this, but Aron says, all right, let's follow you down this Bayesian epistemology rabbit hole. Well, the point of Bayes' theorem is that anything that can make a view more probable given that thing is evidence for that thing. But Aron says, no, if it can be evidence for something else, then it's not evidence for that thing. It's just a misunderstanding of Bayes' theorem. Then he says it is evidence on Bayes' theorem, and Aron says, no, it's not scientific evidence. It just misunderstandings.
That's because I'm a Bayesian, and the Bayesian view, as I've just said many times, holds that the evidencing relation is a structural thing. It's a formal thing. So it doesn't matter whether it's literature or history or forensics. So
what I would take.
So do you accept the hypothesis of common descent that humans and chimps share a common ancestor?
Of course.
Okay, good. Well, I don't know. Maybe you got some other alien. I mean, I don't want to just like jump to the conclusion. I debated an atheist like a month ago who said he didn't know. So I mean, I don't know. I'm totally new to the world of internet atheism.
I did tell you earlier in this discussion that I teach evolution on my channel.
Yeah, but you might believe that the branch occurred some other place.
You understand that evolution is not a belief, right?
You don't believe in evolution? You just said you did.
We're using two contexts here. The religious, I try to stray away from using the word belief because believers mean make-believe.
Atheists often make this mistake about the word belief, as if they don't have beliefs because they think it's some type of psychological disorder of believing something because you don't know it. Here is the Stanford Encyclopedia under the entry Atheism, where it's comparing it to theism. And it says, theism in term is best understood as a proposition, something that is either true or false. It is often defended as the belief that God exists, but here belief means something believed. It refers to propositional content of belief, not to the attitude or psychological state of believing. This is what makes it sense to say that theism is true or false, to argue for or against.
And if I say that I believe something, it means that I think it's true, but I don't know it to be true. A believer make believe. They are pretending that it's true to make themselves believe that it's true, even if they know it's not true. And I've even gotten admissions of that.
Well, I'm sure there are some people like that, yeah. But I'm an evidentialist. I don't like that.
And I'm an epistemist.
You're a what?
Epistemist.
What is that?
One who rejects faith as being the most dishonest position it is possible to have, and thus any belief that requires faith should be rejected for that reason.
So a few years ago, I had a 3-year grant to study the nature of faith. And if you go to a website called thenatureandvalueoffaith.com, there's a bibliography there on the nature of faith and a report of 3 conferences we did and a bunch of papers. You know, it's one of those things where for the granting organization, you have to, guarantee a certain number of publications. I think we got like 100 publications over the 3 years from all the team members.
Did any of them actually include evidence that I would accept as evidence, meaning the definition of evidence?
Dude, I don't know what you're going to accept as evidence, but my point is
I have already given both my definition and the Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy.
A definition. Yes. I'm a Bayesian. I'm a Bayesian, bro. And if it ain't Bayesian, it ain't shit.
Okay, so when we're talking about scientific evidence,
so let's talk about faith. You made an assertion about faith,
and I'm proving the point right now. Because when I said that it is a belief that is based on logic fallacies, it's based on arguments from authority, it's based on subjective impressions, which was your case, but it's based on anything.
Well, it was an observation. I objectively observed that these people's lives were different.
Through all of them having subjective impressions, yes.
Look, bud, the same thing's true. Every time a scientist looks at a gauge, they want to see where the needle goes into the red. It starts with experience. I mean, you have a subjective experience that is phenomenal red, and you're like, yeah, this.
Are you familiar with the concept of a control group?
Yes.
Right. So we have everybody of any religion, every religion, neo-pagan, whatever, solitary practitioner, Wiccan, doesn't matter. They all have this kind of elation when they accept what they now imagine to be the truth for whatever subjective reason, and then they all have this. Every religion, not every person, but every religion has devotees that claim this conversion experience. Yep. Meaning that the experience does not cannot indicate the truth of the belief. Not if every belief has it.
That's just so obviously false from a Bayesian perspective.
Okay. So you're saying that I have a friend who lives not 2 miles from here, who who is a devotee, a disciple of the Egyptian cat-headed goddess Bast, for the very understandable reason that she appeared to him, not just visibly, not just audibly baiting that he be her disciple, but tangibly, because she then gives him a hug. Before she embraced him as her new disciple before she evaporated in evanescence.
Evanescence, I love that word.
Yeah. So that would be a great name for a band, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if only somebody would do that.
Yes. So this guy's telling me that he not only has a personal God, and a lot of Christians will say that theirs is a personal relationship. Well, all these other people claim to have personal relationships too. Has Jesus hugged you? This guy's God showed up topless and hugged him. That was pretty cool.
Well,
now think about it.
Where are we going? Where are we going?
That experience that he recounts, that he believes,
Yeah.
is that evidence of the truth of that belief, that she actually exists?
Yes.
You think Bast exists because my crazy friend thinks he hugged her?
No, but he's got some evidence. He's got non-zero evidence.
How does he have? He doesn't have a fact. He doesn't have anything that is testable.
He does have a fact. He's got his experience. That's a fact.
That's what he's got. He's got a subjective impression. He doesn't have evidence.
Well, look, why do you think there's an external world? Why do you think there's a white mug in front of you? What's your evidence?
Why is there an external world? Because there can't.
Why do you believe it? Why do you believe there's a white mug in front of you?
Because as Hume explained, we have no choice.
You have no choice.
Yep, we literally have no choice. We are forced to make the same assumptions that a baby would or that an animal would, because it is literally impossible to function otherwise. It is madness to attempt to question the existence of the external world.
What is your evidence?
Question the extent.
What is your evidence that there's a white mug in front of you?
Hold on, just 1 sec. I hate to interject, just to make sure that, Aron, you're done making that last point. I appreciate that you guys are spirited.
I do want to throw out one more thing. In all of these discussions, because it always follows the same track, the Christian says, faith is not a belief that is not based on evidence. Okay, what's your evidence? I don't have any. I have evidence that doesn't qualify as evidence, but I have the subjective impression that I'm going to call evidence, and then I'm going to redefine everything, and then I'm going to, because my perspective is so based on falsehood, that the only argument I can make is to question whether reality is real. The only way I can be wrong, or the only way I can be right, is if reality is wrong, and so they have to question whether reality exists. In his case, it's questioning how I know that I have a white mug in front of me. In the case of the last Christian who said that, it was, I can't prove that I existed 2 weeks ago because I could have been created with false memories. That's the argument all the time. It's the same argument for 20 fucking years.
Well, maybe you ought to come up with a better answer.
Ooh, even some atheists got laughed out of Trent in this debate. The rest of the debate, there's not a whole lot that I'm going to add value to. So I'm just going to let you finish the debate if you want to watch it. I will say that Aron is obviously getting upset with the fact that it's not going his way. He threatens to quit earlier on. And I just, overall, not to try and say that this is why Aron's wrong, but he does seem like one of the more dishonest atheists to me. And I believe that some atheists will even admit that. So I know some atheists look at Aron as a liability and not an asset in the debate world. But enjoy the rest of the debate, and there will be more coming soon. Thanks for watching.
I'm asking the question, and you're giving me the wrong answers.
So here's a question for you. What is your evidence that there's a white mug in front of you?
I have sensory perceptions and constant experimentation, outside observations, which are all concordant with the same conclusion, without any deviation or contradiction.
No, I mean right now. What is your evidence that there's a white mug in front of you right now?
That exact thing that I just answered.
So say it again, please.
What's that?
Could you repeat it, please?
The constant experimentation, right? Continuous, outside observations as well.
Yeah.
Constantly running without...
Observation? What's an
Yes.
observation?
What is an observation? Both what I observe with my eyes, feel with my fingers, taste with
Feel,
other senses, and so forth.
taste. Oh, so these
Yes.
are subjective experiences. How
And outside observation, because remember the difference between objective and subjective is that subjective is dependent only on your own personal opinions and perspectives.
Yeah, but
whereas objective would be allowing other people's perceptions to correct where you might be wrong.
So you're in a room by yourself, and it's just
you're
like
going to argue that reality can't be real because you failed to give me any evidence, but you're going to claim that you gave me evidence, and you're going to claim that I am ignorant because I didn't accept the subjective impression that you offered instead of evidence when I said you were only going to give me a subjective impression instead of evidence. You proved my case, but of course will not admit it. And we've been into this an hour and 20 minutes, and we're clearly not going to go any further.
Well,
are we
I'm
done?
trying to discern what your concept of evidence is.
Well, then you should have listened the first 3 times I defined it. Are we done?
No, not even close.
Jim?
We've got let's see. I think we're close to overtime. I've got 2 minutes, but I did start it a few minutes late. So
But-
All right.
I still want to know what you're, it is very telling that when
forgive
you
me. Forgive me, Trent. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
I did start a couple minutes late, so we are at the point at which we would go into the Q&A. So if you guys are okay with it, Q&A, I think
I'd be delighted because I don't.
I still want to know what is that. It's
Gotcha.
yeah, that's fine.
We can-
He
so
went to his
we'll
subjective
jump
experience.
into the
then play
Q&A.
back the video and watch the 3 times I explained it to you before this.
We'll jump into the Q&A. I
Please,
hate to
must.
interrupt Trent. Sorry about that. I just want to make sure that we get as many questions as we can. We appreciate everybody's questions, and just want to remind everybody, both speakers' links are in the description, and I will be getting Trent's new link, which is to his podcast, Slam Harris. That's going to be in there in a sec. As of now,
HarrisPodcast.com.
and
By the way,
yeah.
what article did you suggest that I read on Bayesian something or other?
Yeah, it's on Bayes' theorem in the Stanford
Okay, so
Encyclopedia.
it's just Bayes' theorem. I thought it was Bayesian something else.
Well, at the bottom of that article will be links to relevant other relevant articles.
That's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. I thought you had given a different second word, so that's fine. I'll go ahead and read that.
Yeah,
Got it.
it's really well written.
Awesome, thanks so much, and thrilled to jump into the super chats. By the way, want to let everybody know 100% of the super chats will be going to Save the Children, which is a highly rated charity focused on feeding children throughout the world who are in poverty. So we appreciate all your super chats, and if you're in a position, just want to let you know, if you're in a position where you can't give super chats, you, just by being here, are supporting this channel. You're indirectly supporting future charity streams that we do have just by being here watching, and the most direct way you can help this channel is like things like thumbs up, sharing, stuff like that, as we are excited about the future and we're kind of hoping to build that vision. So with that, first up, God's servant said, God is real and his name is Jesus. Be baptized in Jesus' name, Acts 2:38. Thanks for your super chat. And some of these...
We're not going to read every empty assertion, are we? Can we stick to the questions?
I was just going to say, we can...
Because that demonstrates my point about people asserting things they don't actually know as if they know it.
Okay. We are happy to have each of the speaker give a response to any of the super chats. So we're going to fly through, and some of these are trollish, such as Stephen Steen's next one, which is, we all win the debate when James is here. Very sweet and creepy, Stephen. Thanks so much. Jake 3D, thanks for your super chat as well. He said, Aron, I love you, but you're wrong. Faith is basically nothing more than an equivocation tool. Purely dishonest. In one sentence, it's often used 2 or more than 3 ways. Obviously, you'll get a chance to respond to that, Aron. What we do is, I usually mention it up front, and I forgot to mention that super chats, we just allow super chats if they want to make a comment toward one of the speakers, and then of course the speaker is allowed to give a response to that. So
yeah, I do cover the definition of faith in my book, where I cover like every reference, not just from dictionaries and so forth, but also from scriptures, and every reference that the Bible makes to faith is in the context that I use it. And a couple of them that you might not suspect, and also outside of Christian scriptures, also in obviously the Jewish, but also in the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, they all use faith the same way that I do. And Christians often argue this, but as we always see, it comes down to, well, I'm going to call something evidence that wouldn't qualify as evidence by the definition you gave in the beginning.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah.
could you link to this Faith Project website, the nature and value of faith.com?
Yes. Let's see.
Because we did a 3-year international interdisciplinary study on the nature of faith, and yeah, it's not that.
He's going to say that it's not that, but he couldn't give an example of it, given an hour of discussion.
You couldn't give me an example of an evidence.
Yeah, I could.
Forgive me, I'm so
could.
sorry. I appreciate that you guys have passion. Just to keep going as quick as we can to get to the next one. We had David Street. Thanks for your super chat. He said, Dr. Dougherty, do you think of Dr. Hovind as a peer? That's for you, Trent.
What?
I don't. Maybe they're trolling you. I'm not sure, but that's.
I don't know who that is.
Well, it would not be fair to call him doctor. His degree is basically a mail order catalog. I think he paid something like $100 for it.
Hey, I paid way more than 100.
Yeah.
Oh, you were talking about the other guy. Gotcha.
Yeah, he just ordered his online so that he could call himself doctor. But he's known by another name, which is inmate number 0645217.
Are you serious?
Yeah, because he went to jail for 10 years for
Forgive me.
fraud.
Just to try to move through as many as we can. Landon Freeman has the next one. This is one. By the way, you guys, there is one point of agreement. You guys both probably disagree with Kent Hovind's view of origins. But Landon Freeman, thanks for your super chat. He said, for Aron, what would lead you to consider theism?
The kind of evidence that I described, a reason to actually expect that it exists, a control group, a fact that is not consistent for every religious or paranoid conspiracy theory or belief in past life remembrance or belief in extraterrestrials communicating telepathically. But if it was something that only happened when you buy into Christianity specifically, if it was something unique to Christianity and it was something that we could test with a control group that would indicate a uniqueness to Christianity above all other religions, that would be something.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Appreciate that. Next up, Sigifredo Sarabia, we appreciate your super chat. He says, in China, Russia, and Germany have the most deaths in recorded history. Sometimes these are like I'm interpreting them as I go. Does it have anything to do with their... Oh, okay. So he's saying, if China, Russia, and Germany have the most deaths in recorded history, does it have anything to do with their secularism? No,
because at least in one of those cases they weren't. Stalin, for example, began as a Christian minister before he went berserk, and Hitler was definitely Christian. He originally described the Nazis as a Christian social movement. He said his anti-Semitism was motivated by religious beliefs rather than racial knowledge. And he spoke many times that he was going to advocate and defend Christianity, that it was a Christian nation, that the Nazis were a Christian movement, and that the reason they were killing Jews was out of belief in Christianity. And he said that the Kristallnacht specifically, although he declared himself Catholic, he said that the Kristallnacht was actually inspired by the anti-Semitism of Martin Luther, and Martin Luther was extremely anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I don't like that guy.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, I'm glad we found something else for you.
Yeah, trust me, we both do not like Martin Luther at all.
A couple of guys you guys are in disagreement with, Martin Luther and Kent Hovind. So, Citrapatos Rabia, thanks.
The common ground is just building all the time.
Yeah, have you read much of Martin Luther? I
mean, I've read a lot of Martin Luther.
I've seen a number of quotes attributed to him, so I didn't know how I could verify all of these. So
oh no, he's
I
rough,
just got
man.
some of his sermons and I started reading through his sermons, and it really was as despicable as the mind quotes make it out to be.
Yeah, I don't like that guy.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. And then
he didn't just hate gays; he hated women too, and the big thing for me was that he hated reason. He said that reason was the greatest enemy of faith.
Gotcha. Next up, Sigifredo Sarabia, thank you for your super chat, which is a second one. He said, is it safe to teach kids a title on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life?
Yeah, you got to bear in mind two things. One, they used to write really long titles back in the day. And second, the word race in that book has nothing to do with people. Races was taken to mean the dual meaning of species and subspecies at that time. So favored survival of species, find another word for species that also means species, in this case races, in his title. He didn't actually mention anything to do with races. Well, he did in his first book, actually, on the Voyage of the Beagle, where Darwin made very clear that a lot of the allegations that are made against him are wholly false. He was being criticized for being involved in eugenics, and that the genocide that was going on against the Australoid people was because of him, was inspired by him, when in fact, when he showed up there decades before he came up with his theory of evolution, when he got there, he was lamenting that was already happening before he got there, and that he lamented it as a horrific practice.
He was actually hoping that the theory of origin of species would get rid of racism because whites and blacks came from the same ancestors.
Yeah, and he argued against race. Franz Boas was made famous by saying that there is only one human race. Darwin actually said it first, but because of long, flowery language, he didn't get the bumper sticker quote that people can put on T-shirts. His is a huge paragraph, but it's a beautiful and eloquent paragraph.
Yeah, Darwin's pretty cool. His autobiography is very moving.
He's challenged all of the scientists on his day that all had racist ideas. I mean, racism was ubiquitous. And Darwin, although he was a product of his time, he was ethnocentric. He was reported to be sexist. I haven't seen anything specifically that shows him to be sexist, but I'll take people's word when they say this. On the issue of being racist, Darwin was not racist. Clearly not. He absolutely was against eugenics. He didn't believe there was such a thing as other races. He argued exact opposite of what Hitler did. Hitler was a creationist. He denounced, rejected evolution outright in Mein Kampf, and it described it. He said that belief in macroevolution was a sin against the eternal creator. So Hitler actually argued that evolution was only possible within kinds, and that it was not possible to evolve between kinds or have a new kind. That's a creationist argument. And then of course he follows it with, that it would be a sin against the eternal creator. So I mean, Hitler's views of racial superiority, Darwin said there's no such thing as superiority, and that, what was the other one? There was another challenge that Darwin wrote before there ever was a Hitler. Darwin was already countering Hitler's arguments with the science, and Hitler just perverted all of that, and somehow they get associated. Why, I don't know. The two men were completely opposite camps.
Nietzsche's why they get.
Yeah, and Darwin actually argued at one point that he advocated for the rights of indigenous people in all of the southern climes that he went to, like South America, Africa, whatever. He was on their side for everything, and he was calling out the hypocrisy of the white men he is with, that they shouldn't be doing these terrible things to these innocent people, and how there would be this confirmation, but where there's this double standard where, if this had been a white woman that had done that, we'd be praising her heroism, but because she wasn't white, we're criticizing that. This is what Darwin wrote. And he said he would never again visit a slave country because he saw how people were dehumanized. So I mean, clearly Darwin and Hitler were dead opposite.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next up we have Sigifredo Sarabia. He says, can we kill 'cause in God we trust? If not, heresy?
What?
I'm not sure. Let's see. I might be putting the comma on the wrong, interpreting it as...
Can you sift through these?
So he says, can we kill 'cause in God we trust? If not, is it heresy?
I'm sure the idea is this, hey, our money says in God we trust, so we're ideologically committed to that as a country. So if you don't believe in God...
Yeah, well, by the way, just for people who don't know, it didn't say in God we trust until 1957 or something like that.
Yeah, it's a pretty recent addition.
It was added because of the Red Scare, and they did that sort of Christianized America. So every time America gets scared of something, they start putting God into our money and into the pledge, because it wasn't in the pledge until 1937 or something like that. There's an old cartoon of Porky Pig saying the Pledge of Allegiance without under God in it, because the cartoon was older than the addition to the pledge.
You got it. Thanks so much. Next up.
When I was a little boy, it had just recently made the change So I still had plenty of currency that still said "E pluribus unum," and that was a much better slogan from many one. That was the original motto of this country, and it was a much better ideal.
You got it. Next up, I'm sorry, Wilson said, why do Christians simply hand wave groups like the NIFB, which is I can't remember exactly. I think
The
it's
New Independent Fundamental Baptist Church.
Thank you very much.
I protested them last Sunday, and I'm protesting them again this Sunday. They are the ones that said, the Bible says, or the fourth commandment says, to honor thy father and thy mother, so that thou will live a long life. Right? You always wonder, what does it have to do with living a long life? Why do you have to honor your father and mother in order to live a long life? Well, because it says elsewhere in the Bible that disobedient or disrespectful children will be taken out of the edge of the town and stoned to death. So that's what the
idea is
NIFB,
rather that
that's what the NIFB advocates.
Practices that.
Yes, you say, well, here's our son
and a good life.
According to the Bible,
what's the question?
It was,
according to the Bible, here's our son. He is disrespectful. He is a drunkard. So
okay.
The town will stone him to death.
So the NIFB has these extreme controversial views.
And one of them is that in order to get your children to behave, that you should stone one of them to death, and the others will get the idea.
Okay, so what's the question?
So they ask, why do Christians simply hand wave groups like the NIFB away by saying they're just a minority without actually disassociating themselves from them?
Kent Hovind, by the way, is one of the NIFB.
I think.
I mean, I'm happy to disassociate myself from those guys. I think they're fake Christians. I think they're an abomination. And every Christian I know would say the same thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. You guys got to get better company. All these dominionists and fundamentalists and stuff. I mean, they're out there, but they're such a.
And they own and control everything.
Well, that's
and
a
they're
separate.
writing legislation for all of us at every level of state and federal government.
Okay.
Next up, we have Sigifredo Sarabia. Do atheists or theists lean towards a political party, generally speaking?
Well, that's going to be fluid, because you remember that the Democratic Party was actually started by the Ku Klux Klan. They were the racist party, and then in the '60s, the Republican. If this were the year that I was born, 1962, if I were an adult in that year, I would be a Republican, and I would be a proud Republican. But they kind of switched party platforms from 1962 to 1968 or thereabouts. They switched platforms so that now all the racists and all of the religious fundamentalists are Republicans.
All of them. Every single one without exception.
I don't actually know of any exception. I'll allow that there could be an exception, but the evangelical movement has become synonymous with the Republican Party. And there are believers in the Democratic Party too.
That was maybe true 5 or 10 years ago, but the National Association of Evangelicals has drifted considerably.
That's more true now than it was then, because they got a huge surge in power once Trump was elected. You are correct that a few years ago, before Trump was elected, they were waning. They definitely were. But once Trump was elected, all the power went back to the evangelicals, and now they are a serious damn problem. What was his name? Barry Goldwater was complaining when he ran for president. He was complaining what's going to happen when the Christians get control of the Republican Party. He said it was going to be a big damn problem, and he said the reason that it was so dangerous. Remember the point of this debate was that Christians wouldn't that leading, that legislating and judging all depend on compromise, but that. The Christians would not compromise because they believe that their laws are higher than the laws of the land.
Gotcha. Next up, I know you disagree, Trent, but just to keep moving, I want to try to get through as many as we can.
That's what Barry Goldwater said.
Yeah, I wasn't disagreeing with that. He said that.
Okay. PSP Rockin' Robin, thanks for your super chat. And he said Richard Carrier is a Bayesian. Do you agree with his findings that Jesus is a mythological being, or can Bayesian evidence be flawed?
I've never heard of him.
Yeah, Carrier has different. We come to a similar conclusion by different means.
But I can tell you this: if the guy thinks that Jesus is a myth, he is ipso facto disqualified as a serious scholar.
And yet he's the only one who's written peer-reviewed scholarship on it in the last century or so.
What?
Next up.
So he says himself.
I'm sure he does say that himself.
Next up, Brian
Be
Stevens.
worth looking up.
Thanks for your super chat, Brian Stevens, as well. He says, Bayesian doesn't work with religion. Bad priors.
What?
Yeah, I've often heard religious people and scientists and atheists, and religious people and atheists will both use Bayesian theorem to argue exactly opposite points using the same data.
As well they
That's why
should.
it's so fucking maddening.
There's no
That's
problem
why I
with
never
that.
bothered with it. I mean, how can you use the same method to draw completely opposite conclusions from the same information?
Because one of the two parties is misapplying it. Because people assign, one of the two parties is assigning the wrong probability assignments.
Gotcha.
It's like two mechanics. It's like two mechanics look at the same data and use essentially the same analysis, but
See,
come
they
to
use
opposite.
Bayesian theory. My thing is phylogeny, in the systematic.
I'm sorry, what?
Phylogeny, the systematic classification of life forms, and systematic or cladistic systematists will use Bayesian, and I forget what the other method is, but there's a different method, and they will use the two kind of at the same time and compare results as a means of confirmation. Does that make sense to you? I mean,
Well, I mean, what makes sense to me is that people can apply a common standard and come to opposite conclusions. I mean, that just happens.
yeah, but then there's a way. There's got to be a way to test for it.
Why?
What?
Why?
Because how would you know anything?
There's no
If you
no
did.
guarantees, man.
Right.
The
And-
method doesn't.
and
The
I'm not
method.
saying that there
It's
should
not
be-
a. It's not a.
and I'm not saying that there should be
adequacy of a
guarantees.
method that
I'm
it
saying that
that it
we
always
have to be
comes to
We can't just
a
say
conclusion.
stuff because
Any
we want it.
method can be applied in different ways.
Okay, so in a religion, you can say whatever you want just because you want it to be so, and you can say that it's so, and you can pretend it's so, and you make believe that it's so, but that doesn't make it so. In science, you can't say that it's so until you can show that it's so.
That's such a
that's-
Pollyanna view of science. That shows no experience with actual practicing science.
Sorry, but you're wrong there. You're
Okay.
definitely wrong there. You have to be able to verify that there is truth to what you're saying, or you can't say that it's true. Why do you think people complain so much that science will say probably? Because they have a probability. They can actually show a probability that indicates that. There's a probability there. Yet they can't say that something is possibly true unless they can show that there's a possibility there. They can't say something is possible unless they can show that it's possible.
They
It's
do it all the
necessary
time.
in
Are you
science.
familiar with the
You
replication
can't-
problem? Are you
You can't do in science what you can do with religion. You can't.
are
just say,
you
"Well,
familiar
anything's
with the
possible because we-"
replication problem?
Are you just going to talk over all my sentences? It's very
If I
good.
have to.
We've got let's see, just to try to get through as many questions. We've only got a couple more. If we can just try to get through the super chats, and I want to respect the speaker's time because we're about out of time for Q&A, but I appreciate their donations. And so Justin James Howman said, Trent, you said you are a Bayesian, I think. Why are you weighing eyewitness testimony of religion on an equal order claim to direct evidence?
On an equal Order?
Equal order claim to direct evidence. I think he's saying, like, why are you giving it the same weight as direct evidence?
well, I don't know what he means by direct evidence, but I said nothing that implies that I give them the same weight.
Gotcha.
In confirmation theory, Rudolf Carnap, who's one of the founders of modern confirmation theory, distinguished between incremental confirmation and absolute confirmation. In incremental confirmation, you have evidence piles up layer by layer, and it can reach a threshold that you might want to call belief or something like that. But incremental confirmation can come in arbitrarily small degrees. And this is why we do cumulative case arguments. It's why Richard Swinburne gives a cumulative case argument for the existence of God. Because very rarely in any academic discipline, whether it be a forensic discipline like paleontology or archaeology or an operational science like chemistry, very rarely is there one sort of silver bullet piece of evidence. It always depends on a pretty good network of evidence, each one providing its own portion of weight. And sometimes testimonial evidence is quite strong, and sometimes it's less strong. But there's
Generally-
nothing about the view or my use of it that has any consequence for how any individual item of confirmation is weighed. The point of incremental confirmation is just that it's greater than zero. And when somebody makes a radical, unjustified, made up, fabricated claim like there's no evidence for a proposition, all it takes to falsify an absolute negation is one counterexample.
Don't
And
you wish you'd provided one?
I'm glad I did.
Next,
You hadn't,
we-
obviously.
let's see. Forgive
All right,
me
next
just to
question.
jump to the other one. We have from Avatar of Hatred. Thanks for your super chat.
Avatar of hatred?
They said, Dr. Trent, would you say that Christian morality has been more important to Christian success than our physical geography and access to resources? And why? I think that they're maybe referring to like America.
Christian, yeah, I don't know what they mean by Christian success. To me, Christian success is becoming more conformed to the image of Christ and having the fruit of the Spirit.
That the question seems to be talking about historically the advantage that Christianity had in both having Constantine as a leader and also having the advantage of the printing press. And
No, there's not actually really great evidence that Constantine was a Christian. He certainly gave the Christians some certain rights and privileges, but it's not clear he himself was a Christian.
But then within 70 years of making Christianity illegal, or we're making Christianity
Legal with the Edict of Milan, right?
Yeah,
And then in
yeah, suddenly-
390, 391, Theodosius actually made it the law.
Yeah, and
I used to
then-
teach classics. I'm extremely familiar with the history.
Yeah, so within 70 years it became illegal to be anything else.
Okay.
One of the reasons that Christianity is dangerous.
Next up, that is it for the super chats. And forgive me, I know we usually try to go into the other questions as well. Just wanted to kind of honor those donations to save the children. I want to respect the debaters' time because they've already gone over the time that
I'm happy to be here another hour.
I'm not going to be here another hour, but I'll take another two questions.
We'll go, okay, so did you just say two or a few?
But we'll do a few.
Okay, you bet. So we'll do three more, and then just want to say thanks so much for everybody's support of the channel overall and your super chats for Save the Children. And we have full accountability on that. If you want to see the receipt after I send the totaled super chats to Save the Children, hey, I'll send the receipt to anybody. Just email me at moderndaydebate@gmail.com. We want to have full transparency when we do these charity drives. So next up, Praise I Am That I Am. Thanks for your question. He said, my question to Aron is, have you conceded that, let's see, this might be trollish.
Then skip it.
Okay, so sorry, Praise. It's just that it's kind of a...
The name is trollish.
The question is kind of loaded with like some things that might not be assumed by others. So the Shepherd's Ambassador asked Aron Ra, why do you look more to Christ? Why do you look more to Christ, to what he taught, and not to the misuse of his teachings in Christian history?
I think they meant to say why.
Why don't you?
I-
Yeah,
I
he
think you're
must mean
right.
why.
I actually do look at what Christ allegedly taught, and the whole bit about everything is wrong with it. I mean, all of it. The guy was a madman, if there was a guy at all, that he was a madman. So he believed in demons for one thing. He wanted everybody to be a faith healer. He wants to be renunciate, of course, but at the same time he's trying to take all these donations to supposedly give to the poor, which doubtless means himself. And he didn't know when figs are in season, so he's going to curse the tree and all that. And then you're supposed to hate your mother and your father and your sister and your brother and your wife and your own life in order to follow him or to become his disciple. And you have to believe things for no reason, right? Thomas had evidence, but you don't need evidence. Blessed is he who is not seen and yet believed, and so on. So, I mean, why would you want to believe in a faith healer? Especially a first century madman who obviously had no idea what he was talking about anything ever.
Next up, we will go to the Landon Freeman. Thanks for your question. This is for Aron as well, and then Trent, I promise we got one for you. So he said, some secularists believe Christians should keep their religion to themselves. Do you share this belief, or are you okay with Christians publicly professing their beliefs?
There's some people you can't help. I mean, it's just kind of like leave them alone. I mean, it's like if somebody had a hard drug addiction and they've had it all their life, you know, and they're now 75 years old, and it would actually compromise their health to try to get them off heroin or whatever. There's just a point that just she's not hurting anybody. Just leave her be, you know. But when they start getting into power, then it's a problem. Then it starts legislating against everybody else, and there go all of our rights.
Gotcha. Next up, thanks very much. This is the final question. I appreciate the speakers being willing to field a few extra. So we have Iron Chair here. Ask Trent, will Christianity ever produce repeatable and reliable evidence for God?
Been doing it for 2,000 years, buddy.
And haven't done it yet.
Next, and that is it for our questions. So thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate it. And with that, just want to remind you, the speakers have their links in the description. So if you're like, hey, I really enjoy listening to them, you can check them out conveniently down below. Also,
and if you would please, this is how I make a living now. So I mean, please check patreon.com/ARONRA. I need all the help I can get.
Oh, that's
if you
right.
like what I do, please support my work.
And I will put that link in the description as well as I add Trent's as well. So with that, I want to say thanks to our speakers again for being here. And I can assure everybody, I know that this was a passionate debate, but I'm confident these guys are going to be like, well, all right, you know, they're not going to be fuming and, you know, like, they're not enemies. Our hope is that everybody can passionately disagree, fervently disagree, and still say, well, all right, take care. So thank you very much for being here, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
And with that, I want to say take care, everybody. Have a great night and keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.